All right, so now that we've completed the graphic organizer for translating expressions and kind of have an idea of some of the English words that we can use to represent addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, I wanted to take a step back and see if we could remember some of these symbols that were at the bottom part of that graphic organizer for translating expressions. So just take a minute and see if you can match these 5 symbols that we see in algebra with the correct identifiers over there. All right, so more often than not, most of my students can usually get number 3. That's the one that they remember the most. So number 3 is absolute value. Absolute value, that's the distance a number is from 0. So the classic example, and we're actually going to take a definition of this in a second, but one of the things that we always say is 4 is 4 away from 0. So the absolute value of 4 is 4. The absolute value of -4 is also 4 because -4 is 4 away from 0, but in the opposite direction. If you guessed that or knew that number 1 was a square root, that's awesome. So that's one that a lot of times my students will describe as a check with a line on top of it, which then makes D cubed root number 2. So if we got those, now you just have 2 possible options left. And I think most of the time we actually go to number 4 and 5 before we do the square root and the cubed root, but square means the number 2. We'll see that more when we get to exponents. It's something times itself. So a number squared, well, a number squared, that's something squared, that's something to the 2nd power here, and then the last one, it's something times itself 3 times, so that's a number cubed. So that would be x cubed, that's a number cubed, some number cubed. All right, moving on. So last time we filled out that graphic organizer, and now we're actually going to see if we can translate some of these expressions. So these are 3 algebraic expressions. They're algebraic expressions because they contain variables. In fact, they have s, t, and v. They have operations. We said last time there's only 4 operations that we can do in any math class, and that's add, subtract, multiply, and divide. And they contain numbers. So numbers, operations, and variables or symbols. Those are kind of the ways that we can identify an algebraic expression. They also don't have equal signs. When they don't have equal signs, that's a pretty good idea that we're not talking about equations. That's actually chapter 2, but we are talking about expressions. So if we were to substitute some value in here, at the end, we wouldn't have an equal sign. We wouldn't have a variable. We would just have a number. But right now, our goal for this is to say, I'm going to give you here algebra, and I want you to say that algebraic expression, but just in English words. So I think the first one there, s plus 3, is a pretty easy way to start with. So instead of saying s, though, I'm just going to say, because s is a variable, I'm just going to say it's a number plus, that's the English word for addition, and then the number 3. There's lots of other ways we could say that. So if you take a look at your graphic organizer that we filled out, some of the other words that we know that mean addition, well, we could use any of these. We could use sum, we could use add, we could use more than, we could use increase by, we just use plus, we could use gain or added to. So I like to use the word sum. And when we say the phrase sum, we actually start with that phrase. So we say the sum of. And that of is kind of a key word because it tells us that we're adding 2 things, at least 2 things together. The first thing comes right after the word of. So the sum of a number. In fact, this number here was s. So the sum of the first thing was a number, and that's my second keyword, 3. And I really think it helps here to go back and think about that. The first keyword is of, which tells me that whatever comes after it, well, that's the first thing that's being added together. So this part, a number, well, that was my S. And 3, that's the other part. And what's interesting is that wherever you see the word and, well, that's where your symbol goes. So that's my S plus 3. We can just do a couple more. So I could say a number increased by 3. And I'll do one more. And this one's actually, we can actually use the phrase more than. And when we use more than, sometimes we change the order and sometimes we don't. And that's because we're allowed to add any two numbers in any order and we still get the same thing. It's called a commutative property. So I'm going to say, in this case, 3 more than a number. And when we see that more than, oftentimes we'll flip it. So the more than means I'm just going to move whatever came before it at the end. So my 3 goes at the end and my number comes before. So that's 4 different ways that we could say the same thing. So let's go ahead and look at these other 2 expressions. I have division there. I have the number 10 and I have the variable t. So there's lots of different ways we could say this. I think I often like to start with this, maybe kind of like the one that we think of. So if we think of division, well, then I'm going to say 10, and the short word for division is divide. So divided by a number. And I could say a number t and be specific, or I could just say a number. A different way of saying that is I could say 10 over a number. I want to make sure I write a number here. 10 over a number. And I'm going to put the t there again because we're being specific. And then the last one I want to do is use that word quotient. So when we use the word quotient, that's another one of those special of and phrases. So if I say the quotient of, well, the of part tells me I'm going to add 2 things. So of, well, that's the first thing. And in this case, it needs to be the numerator. So it needs to be 10. So the quotient of the top, which is 10, and that's my second keyword. That tells me that's where my symbol, my math symbol, my division symbol is going, and a number. So in this case, the quotient of 10 and, well, that tells me where the division symbol is going. So 10 is the top, and tells me I'm moving down to the bottom, a number. And I probably should put at the end there, t. And last, certainly not least, is this v minus 8. So a lot of times when we see the subtraction symbol, we use the word minus. So that's the one I'm going to use to start this off. So instead of saying v, though, I'm going to say a number minus 8. That's one way to say it. So a number minus 8. I couldn't say 8 minus a number. That would be the opposite. So in this case, order is really important. We're not allowed to change the order of division, and we're not allowed to change the order of subtraction. And one really good example of that is if I do 10 minus 3, well, I get 7. And if I do 3 minus 10, well, I get negative 7. And those are not the same. So that's why I'm not allowed to change the order of subtraction. So I can't do that. Same thing with division. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So if I had $10 and I shared it to 2 people, each person would get $5. But if I had $2 and I tried to share it to 10 people, well, that's most certainly not the same. It's actually 10 doesn't even divide into 2. We could simplify this fraction and make it 1/5, and a fifth of a dollar is 20 cents. So definitely not the same thing. So again, we can't change the order of division. So can't change the order of division, can't change the order of subtraction. So in this case, we need to make sure that we stay in the same order. So different words that I could use to say the subtraction here would be the difference. So the difference of and that's one of those, again, words where as soon as I see the word of, I have to have two things. The first comes right after of. The second comes right after the word and. So the difference of a number v and that tells me I move into my second thing and also where the operation symbol, the subtraction symbol is going to go, and 8. So when we see difference of, and that's the first thing, and that tells me where my subtraction symbol is going to go, and then the number 8, and that's the second thing right after the subtraction symbol. Let's just do a couple more here. So I could also say a number v less 8. Well, that just means the variable v, and I'm going to subtract 8. And then we can use the other phrase, which is less than. And if I see less than, I started writing the number 8 there. I'm actually going to need to change that. I'm going to write the letter, or the word 8, and have to say 8 less than a number. And so when I see the word less than, that means I'm going to be doing the operation subtraction. I'm going to be taking away or subtracting, but I'm also going to be changing the order. So I want 8 less than a number. So this means that when I see less than, I'm going to change the order. And a good way of thinking about that is if I just chose some value for v. So if I choose 20, so this is just a little aside here, but I'm going to choose 20 for v. So if I plug that in where I had v minus 8, well, that's 20 minus 8, which is 12. And when I see 8 less than my number, well, the number I chose was 20, so 8 less than 20 is 12, and that makes sense. If I wrote it the other way, though, if I wanted to say it the other way, if I chose 20 and I put my 8 in front and I wrote it in reverse, I would get negative 12, and that's not the same thing. So when we see the phrase less than, I need 8 less than that number, which means I have to take it or subtract it away from that number. So that's kind of an introduction to translating expressions. And now what I want to do is just give you guys an opportunity to see if you can try a few here on your own. So I wanted to see if you could try these 4. See if you could write the algebra for these. And I'm going to pause the video here, and then in a second I'm going to reveal it. I want you guys to see if you guys had the right algebra. So this is actually going in reverse of what we just did. We just practiced being given algebra and writing words for it. And so now I've given you the words, and I want to see if you can write the algebra. So I went ahead and put up the answers to the first 2. I think those are usually the 2 easier ones, but I wanted to take about 30 seconds and answer the next 2. So when we see quotient, that means that I'm going to divide. I need to have division or a fraction bar. I see the word of, that tells me that's the first thing, or what's going to be in the numerator. Well, the quotient of a number cubed. We know that cubed means exponent 3. So I'm just going to choose some variable. I'm going to make it s to the 3rd power cubed. And that tells me I'm now moving down to the denominator, and that tells me I'm moving down to the denominator. That's my second thing, and that's going to be 7. And there's the answer to number 4. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll continue to practice this as we keep working on translating expressions. Have a great day.